From the four corners of the earth and the far corridors of history. Dateline, World War II. January 1933, Berlin. President Paul von Hindenburg names Adolf Hitler the leader of the National Socialist German Workers' Party to the position of Chancellor. Hitler and the Nazis, as the National Socialists are known, have risen to power on a platform of extreme nationalism and anti-communism, coupled with common street thug violence to silence their critics. They have succeeded largely because Germany, historically one of the world's most powerful, vibrant nations, is now largely a basket case. The worldwide economic depression has had magnified effects here because of the severe reparations forced on the German people at the end of World War I. The Treaty of Versailles, which ended that war, led to hyperinflation and rampant unemployment. The effects of the treaty go far beyond the destruction of the German economy, however. It prohibits Germany's having a strong army, bans their air force, and reduces their navy to a mere shadow of the navies of other European powers. Many Germans, unreconciled with the surrender in 1919, believe that Germany should still be the dominant power in Europe and cannot accept her subjugation at the hands of the Western Allies. Particularly galling is the humiliation of Germany by France, a longtime rival. This underlying dissatisfaction, coupled with the ineffectiveness of the current government, has created a ripe environment for the growth of ultranationalistic groups bent on the destruction of Weimar Germany and the resurrection of German dominance. It is to this sentiment that Adolf Hitler has appealed. He and his followers, who began as little more than a rabble of beer hall theorists and carousers, have become the most potent political force in Germany. They have risen from the ashes of a failed coup in 1923, the so-called beer hall putsch. Hitler served 9 months in jail, during which time he wrote a political autobiography, Mein Kampf. That screed outlines his political, social, and racial vision, and is the self-described destiny of Germany and her people. Out of jail, Hitler sought power in Germany in a seemingly legal manner. Amid the chaos enveloping the nation, the Nazis' ability to enforce order by violence, if necessary, won them the support of the military and the leaders of German industry. This support gave Hitler the legitimacy he so craved, and coupled with the intimidation of his opponents, has propelled him to the chancellorship. Now in power, Hitler moves to solidify his position. On 30 June, he ruthlessly eliminates all potential rivals. Within the party itself, he orders the execution of the leaders of the SA, the paramilitary group that helped him solidify his power. On 2 August 1934, President Hindenburg dies. Hitler declares himself Führer and Chancellor. He solidifies his position by getting the military to swear personal allegiance to him alone. In March 1935, Hitler institutes compulsory military service and reestablishes the German Air Force in direct violation of the Treaty of Versailles. The Western Allies, responsible for the enforcement of the Versailles provisions, do nothing. In March, Hitler issues the Nuremberg decrees, greatly increasing the discrimination and persecution of Germany's large Jewish population. Again, the world's reaction is muted. Emboldened, Hitler takes an even larger gamble. In March 1936, against the advice of his own generals, he sends German troops back into the Rhineland, a region historically a part of Germany that has been demilitarized as a buffer zone with France. The British and the French briefly protest the move, but take no action. It is, for Hitler, an enormous triumph. In this single stroke, he establishes his supremacy over his generals, rallies the German masses behind him, and most importantly, cows the Western Allies. Hitler's progressively more oppressive domestic policies, coupled with his rebuilding of the German military and disregard for the Treaty of Versailles, have many in the West watching him with a wary eye. But inside Germany, he is adored. To the German people, he is a hero. He has brought them from the depths of depression and subjugation to their rightful place as a dominant player in the affairs of Europe. They know, whatever happens, Germany under the Nazis can no longer be ignored. February 1938, Berlin. Bolstered by his earlier foreign policy successes and impressed with his ever-increasing military power, Adolf Hitler is now setting his sights on expanding his Reich. Hitler's Germany, Hitler has decided, should include all the German-speaking people in Europe. Austria is the first country he covets for his greater German Reich. Hitler is thinking, however, beyond the common ancestry and culture. Austria's abundant iron and timber reserves are vital to the continued growth of the Nazis' military machine. Strategically, Austria will give Hitler a land bridge connecting him and his ally to the south, Italian dictator Benito Mussolini, who has finally dropped his objections to Germany's annexation of Austria. In his efforts to get the Austrians to submit, Hitler uses many of the same tactics he used in his own rise to power. He arms pro-Nazi factions within Austria, promoting civil unrest and political discord. Hitler then puts intense pressure on the Austrian Chancellor Schuschnigg to allow the Germans to roll into his country unopposed. With German troops massed on the border, Schuschnigg resigns, and on 11 March, Nazi Minister of the Interior Arthur Seyss-Inquart takes over as Chancellor. His first act is to invite the German army into Austria. By noon of the 12th, Nazi stormtroopers are marching through the streets of Vienna. The Germans are greeted with great enthusiasm by the Austrian people, who have come to think of themselves as Germans. The streets are lined with cheering crowds. Nazi banners and Heil Hitlers fill the air. The Austrian excitement is soon tempered by the brutal reality of life under the Nazi regime. Just as they have been in Germany, Austria's Jews, communists, and other so-called undesirables become easy targets for Hitler's minions. They disappear in large numbers to concentration camps in Germany. Once again, as in his remilitarization of the Rhineland, Hitler's gamble pays off. The British and French protest the annexation, but take no further action against him. Hitler offers repeated, vehement assurances that his territorial ambitions have been fulfilled, and that the sacrifice of Austria will guarantee peace for Europe. Even as he does this, however, he is focusing his attention on Czechoslovakia and the Sudetenland. The Sudetenland, on Czechoslovakia's western border with Germany, is mainly populated by Germans. Here, the Czechs have constructed an extremely well-fortified defensive line that Hitler has no wish to confront. So, once again, he uses racial rhetoric and bullying tactics to achieve his goal. In mid-September, Hitler informs British Prime Minister Chamberlain he intends to secure self-determination for the Sudeten Germans and stop what he says is Czech mistreatment of the German minority. Chamberlain, whose only priority appears to be avoiding war, convinces French Premier Édouard Daladier to go along with Hitler's plan to annex the Sudetenland. With pressure mounting from all sides to give in to the Germans, the Prague government agrees to Hitler's demands. Chamberlain informs the Fuhrer of this. Hitler, in return, ups the ante. He now insists that some 8 million Czechs relocate for the convenience of 250,000 Sudeten Germans. He also insists that they leave behind all their military and agricultural goods. Chamberlain is irate and refuses the demands. It seems that war is now inevitable. The Czechs begin to mobilize, and the British fleet goes to a wartime standing. On 19 March, Chamberlain and Daladier fly to Munich to meet with Hitler and Mussolini to try to reach a last-minute agreement and avert a war. Without a representative of the Czech government present, Chamberlain and Daladier once again give in to Hitler, believing anything is better than war. Chamberlain returns to jubilant crowds in England, declaring that the Munich Agreement means peace for our time.
This morning, I had another talk with the German Chancellor, Herr Hitler. And here is the paper which bears his name upon it as well as mine. We regard the agreement signed last night and the Anglo-German naval agreement as symbolic of the desire of our two peoples never to go to war with one another again.
While the majority of the English are thrilled that war has been avoided, there are those who warn that appeasing Hitler is an unwise and dangerous practice. Chief among them are First Lord of the Admiralty Winston Churchill and former Foreign Secretary Anthony Eden. Stopping him now, they argue, will be far less costly than waiting until his military might is ground, and that giving in will only prove to Hitler that the West lacks the will to confront him. September 1931, Manchuria. The Japanese army, without the approval of its own government in Tokyo, pours into the northern Chinese province after the Japanese-owned railroad is sabotaged near the city of Mukden. Chinese resistance is light and disorganized. By early 1932, the Japanese are firmly in control of the province. The lack of Chinese resistance is in large part due to the bitter civil war engulfing the country. Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist forces are battling the rebel communists led by Mao Zedong. The Generalissimo is more concerned with fighting Mao than facing the Japanese forces in the north. In February, the Japanese declare Manchuria independent and install the puppet state Manchukuo. The League of Nations condemns the move, but is too weak and fractured to do anything about it. Chiang continues to direct the majority of his forces against the communists, despite continued border skirmishes with the Japanese until 7 July 1937, when Rising Sun forces, claiming they have been assaulted, launch an all-out offensive on Peking. A vicious battle ensues, but by the 28th, the enemy is in control of the ancient Chinese capital. On 13 August, Japanese land, air, and naval forces launch an assault on the vital central coastal city of Shanghai, throwing 200,000 troops against the city. The Chinese resist fiercely for nearly 3 months, until 8 November, when the Japanese wrest it from their control. Advancing inland, the Rising Sun forces quickly conquer nearby Suzhou and Hangzhou to the south. They drive up the Yangtze River toward the provincial capital, Nanking. As the enemy draws near, Chiang moves the capital east to Chongqing. The Japanese air forces viciously bomb the civilian sectors of Nanking. Their army routs the undertrained, outgunned Chinese defenders. The fall of the city on 13 December sparks a wave of atrocities by the victorious Japanese. Troops rape thousands of Chinese women and force thousands more into sexual slavery. Some 40,000 Chinese civilians are tortured and killed. The world is outraged and condemns this rape of Nanking. Throughout 1938, the Japanese advance continues. They drive south toward the Yellow River. In central China, they drive inland, up the Yangtze as far as Hankow, which they occupy on 25 October. Although their forces are advancing with relative ease, they seldom win a decisive victory. The Chinese virtually melt away before them, only to reappear as guerrilla units harassing their flanks. By the end of 1939, Japanese leaders are beginning to realize a quick victory will not be possible. They decide to stop their advance, offer Chiang peace terms, and reap the economic rewards of the areas already under their control. Chiang flatly refuses all offers of peace. The Japanese react by enforcing a strict air and naval blockade, denying the Chinese badly needed supplies. Chiang, meanwhile, is content to sit. He's carefully watching the outside world and believes the Japanese aggression and the events in Europe will soon catapult the world into war. With that war, Chiang believes, will come the allies he so desperately needs, and a chance to truly combat the Japanese occupiers. August 1939, after months of secret negotiations, the world is stunned as Germany and Russia announce they have signed a treaty of non-aggression. The former arch-enemies agree not to attack one another or to support any third party that might attack the other. Although the animosity and distrust between the two still remain, Hitler and Stalin both see real advantages for themselves in the unlikely pact. For Hitler, it is the key to Poland. Having pushed Britain and France to their limit in Czechoslovakia, Hitler fears that an invasion of Poland will bring both of them into the war in Poland's defense. This agreement, he is sure, assures him of the domination of Europe by avoiding Germany's fate in World War I of a two-front war. If he has to get in bed with the communists to do so, it is a small price to pay. Ensuring Russia's neutrality in such a war would mean he could concentrate all of his newly acquired military might on Western Europe. With Britain and France under his boot, it would be easy to turn his forces loose on the Bolsheviks. Stalin, left out of the negotiations over the fate of Austria and Czechoslovakia, believes that the West is conspiring against him. The Russian dictator sees the pact with Hitler as assurance he will not have to face a united Britain, France, and Germany. Though he does not trust Hitler and believes he will have to confront him eventually, he hopes this pact will buy him the time he needs to build up his armies. The leaders of the Western democracies, who had always imagined that Russia would serve as a kind of insurance policy against the Nazis, are left facing Hitler's ever-increasing armies alone. They know they risk total defeat by declaring war in the defense of Poland, but their naivete about the wisdom of appeasing Hitler has faded. They believe that with the strokes of their pens, Hitler and Stalin have signed away any hope for peace in Europe. ends of the earth and the far corridors of history. Dateline, World War II. September 1939. In the pre-dawn hours, the tenuous peace that has settled over Europe since 1919 is shattered as German forces smash across the Polish border. The attack is in response to a supposed Polish raid into Germany. That incursion, near the town of Gleiwitz, was, in fact, staged by Nazi agents in Polish army uniforms. Hitler feigns outrage and launches what is certainly the biggest counterattack in history, 53 divisions in all. Poland is a plum ripe for the picking. Forming a round salient in the west, it is trapped between two massive German pincers to its north and south. The Polish army, while imposing on paper, in reality, stands no real chance against the German onslaught. The speed with which the German forces sliced through the Polish defenses is astounding. German armored panzer divisions smashed through the Polish lines on all fronts. The Luftwaffe pounds the roads and railroads, making reinforcement impossible. Close behind the tanks come armored infantry units. They exploit the massive holes the panzers have punched in the Polish lines. Once in the rear, the panzers fan out, creating havoc, disrupting communications, and striking Polish forces from all directions. The Luftwaffe pounds the roads and railroads, making reinforcement impossible. On 2 September, Hitler is jubilant. His armies are well ahead of schedule, and equally important and somewhat surprising, Britain and France have not yet honored their commitment to come to Poland's defense. This is crucial, the Germans know, because their border with France is guarded by only 10 divisions. A rapid response by France would meet essentially no resistance. On 3 September, Hitler's war turns into World War. At 9 a.m., the British issue an ultimatum, giving the Germans until 11 a.m. to begin pulling out of Poland or face war with the West. Hitler ridicules the demand and orders his forces to continue their advance. Everywhere, there are signs of the complete destruction of the Polish military. Smashed guns, dead men and horses, thousands of bewildered prisoners. On the 17th, the reeling Poles get a knife in the back. Russian Premier Joseph Stalin, wanting to get his share in the spoils of Poland, sends Red Army forces pouring across Poland's undefended eastern border. By the 19th, Polish resistance is unorganized and sporadic. Units who stand their ground and fight are surrounded and decimated. Those who try to withdraw and regroup face annihilation by the murderously effective Luftwaffe. Desperation turns to panic as the Poles realize there is nothing the Western powers can do to protect them from the bloodthirsty dictators. By 27 September, Warsaw is forced to surrender. A Polish government in exile is formed in Paris. Western leaders, who declined to stop Hitler when he was weak, now must face the reality of Nazi strength. It is too late for Poland. Now they must be concerned with the day they themselves will inevitably have to face the Nazi onslaught. September 1939, Berlin. Hitler and the German High Command are elated. In 6 days, their blitzkrieg tactics have sealed the fate of Poland and all but destroyed its armies. They are now free to begin moving divisions out of Poland and back to their dangerously undefended border with France. The Germans had gambled that the Western Allies would be slow to mobilize and indecisive about retaliating for the invasion of Poland. Their gamble seems to be paying off. The French, who, if they acted, would have a virtually unopposed march into Germany's industrial heartland, have inexplicably reacted only by asking the British Air Force to refrain from bombing German positions. So the French army sits in its $500 million defensive position known as the Maginot Line, nervously staring across the border as the German forces increase. The Germans, who made blitzkrieg a household word as they streaked across Poland, have coined a new phrase for the French strategy: sitzkrieg. The uneasy peace that results is surely temporary. While there is little visible activity at the front, in Berlin there are major changes in the long-standing plan for the invasion of France. The original called for the German armies to pour through Belgium as they had in 1914. But General Fritz von Manstein puts forth a daring new plan. It calls for a diversionary attack in Belgium to be followed by the main German thrust through the heavily wooded Ardennes, south of the French-Belgian border. Von Manstein believes that Allied armies rushing north to meet the initial threat can be cut off by the main German force and annihilated. On 10 May 1940, the plan goes into effect. Army Group B, under the command of General von Bach, plunges into Belgium and Holland. Allied troops flood north to meet the thrust, their leaders failing to recognize the fact that the Luftwaffe, which had been so successful in cutting off reinforcements in Poland, makes little attempt to impede the progress of British and French armor units. Meanwhile, General Gert von Rundstedt's Army Group A, consisting almost entirely of armor and mechanized infantry units, sweeps into the Ardennes. By the 12th, Army Group A has reached the Meuse on a broad front from Dinant in the north to Sedan in the south. Believing the Germans will need 5 or 6 days to concentrate their forces for a river crossing, the French fail to recognize the grave threat to their flank. On the 13th, 1,000 Luftwaffe planes strike the French Second Army opposite Sedan. The diving Stukas strike terror in the French defenders, who abandon their artillery positions for their trenches. With the cessation of French fire, General Heinz Guderian's mechanized infantry forces easily ford the Meuse and establish a bridgehead. On the 20th, a mere 10 days from the start of the campaign, Guderian's forces reached the English Channel at Abbeville. The German plan has worked brilliantly. The Allied armies in the north are now surrounded on 3 sides with their backs to the sea at the French port of Dunkirk. With Guderian driving up the coast from the south and Army Group B pushing from the north and east, the destruction of the British Expeditionary Force and the French and Belgian units with them seems to be but a matter of days. The English people, hearing of their army's plight, mobilize in a last-ditch effort to save their men on the coast of France. On 1 June, a desperate flotilla, made up of every available ship from the largest liner to the smallest fishing boat, begins the treacherous trip across the Channel. With the RAF providing what cover they can, the ships come in as close as possible under heavy German fire. For 3 days, the boats cross and recross the Channel until 3 June, when all British and some French and Belgian soldiers have been rescued. On 5 June, with northern France in their control, the Germans begin the second phase of their offensive. By 10 June, German forces advancing along the coast cross the River Seine west of Paris at Rouen. On the same day, the already beleaguered French are dealt another blow. Benito Mussolini, unable to resist sharing in the spoils of a defeated France, sends 400,000 Italian troops across the border into the French Riviera. By the 11th, German troops reach the Marne River west of Paris. With German armies driving south on both sides of Paris, the capital is declared an open city. The Germans, however, do not move to occupy it until the 14th. The main focus of their efforts is the destruction of what remains of the Allied armies in France. On the 14th, the Maginot Line is penetrated south of Saarbrücken by the German First Army. Now the German advances are limited only by how far the panzers can move in a day. The battle for France is, for all intents and purposes, over, and what little will to fight the French have shown fades. On 17 June, French Prime Minister Paul Reynaud resigns. He is replaced by Marshal Henri Pétain, a French hero from World War I. Pétain is convinced that France and Britain are doomed to defeat, and that dealing with the Germans will be, in the long run, better for the French than continuing this futile resistance. He announces he will ask the Germans for armistice terms. Meanwhile, the German advance continues. Guderian's forces successfully drive all the way to the Swiss border. On the 18th, the 7th Panzer Division under General Erwin Rommel captures Cherbourg as the 5th Panzer takes Brest. On 22 June, the French delegation, led by General Hunziker, goes to Compiègne Forest to sign the armistice. Hitler, not about to miss the satisfaction of dictating terms to the French, personally heads the German delegation. Fulfilling his own vision of historical retribution, Hitler holds the surrender ceremony in the same railroad car the French had used to dictate the terms of peace to the Germans at the end of World War I. General Wilhelm Keitel presents the German terms, and after hours of discussion, the French agree to them. 2 days later, Hitler travels to Paris to fulfill his lifelong dream of entering the French capital as victorious conqueror. He is jubilant. He has defied the world and prevailed. His armies have smashed every obstacle in their path, and most importantly, the great injustice of Versailles has been reversed. July 1940. With most of continental Europe in his pocket, Adolf Hitler now turns his attention to Operation Sea Lion, the pending invasion of England. He issues a directive ordering Hermann Göring's Luftwaffe to drive the RAF from the skies, establishing the air supremacy that will be necessary for a large-scale crossing of the English Channel. Throughout July, the Luftwaffe concentrates its attacks on British shipping in the Channel. Though the attacks are destructive, there is no concerted effort to gain air superiority. On 13 August, Göring's forces begin their all-out offensive to crush the RAF. Calling it Altertag, or Day of the Eagle, the Germans send their bombers, escorted by Me-109s and Me-110s, to strike British industry and port facilities. On the first day, they fly over 1,500 sorties. The attacks continue day after day. Göring throws everything he has at the British. While the Luftwaffe does inflict enormous damage, the RAF is far from being driven from the skies. Day in and day out, they get the better of Göring's supposedly superior pilots. The RAF has several distinct advantages over the Luftwaffe. First, they are fighting over their own territory. Fuel reserves aren't nearly the concern to them they are to the German pilots flying from the continent. British pilots who are shot down parachute to safety and, in many instances, are back up fighting the same afternoon. Germans end up in POW camps. Another factor working in the RAF's favor is their use of radar. They can see the German air fleets forming up over France and direct their forces accordingly. While the Germans understand the technical aspects of the radar system, they have yet to grasp the enormous tactical advantage it gives the British, and Göring personally removes British radar sites from the German target list. As the attacks continue, the British people rally behind their protectors in the RAF. Prime Minister Churchill on 20 August comments that never in the course of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. Indeed, It seems the brave pilots of the RAF are doing what no one has done to date: stopping Hitler. The German attacks, however, are taking their toll. Many of the British airfields are knocked out of commission, and by 31 August, the RAF's situation is critical. On 7 September, British authorities issue an invasion warning to the populace. On the same day, the Germans, not knowing how close they are to bringing the RAF to its knees, change tactics. Instead of continuing to target airfields, the Germans decide to start bombing London and other major civilian populations. Night and day, the Germans pound the cities, causing enormous damage. But instead of breaking the will of the people, it solidifies them. By mid-September, the RAF is recovered and is contesting the Germans fiercely. In Berlin, Hitler realizes that with winter coming on and Goering far from achieving his promised goal of air superiority, any plan for an invasion of Britain will have to wait. On 17 September, he postpones Operation Sea Lion. The Führer's plans to invade and conquer, for the first time, have been thwarted. The United States has been, in the months leading up to Hitler's aggression in Europe, content in its role as sleeping giant. Mired for more than a decade in the Great Depression, America is only now returning to a sort of normalcy. The public has no desire to get involved in a European conflict and is paying even less attention to Japanese aggression in Asia. But on 1 September 1939, the armies and air forces of Nazi Germany sweep into Poland. Hitler's blitzkrieg is a wake-up call to the world, and though most Americans still consider Nazism a European issue, President Roosevelt decides that the time has come for America to prepare for war. On 5 September, 2 days after Britain and France declare war on Germany, Roosevelt declares a limited national emergency and extends American naval patrols into the waters of the Caribbean and the seas around the Philippine archipelago. Ostensibly merely an enforcement of American neutrality, in effect, the added American patrols free British ships for duty closer to the front. In November, Congress, pressured by the Roosevelt administration, grants the president the power to sell American military hardware to foreign powers on a cash-and-carry basis. Overnight, Great Britain becomes America's largest customer, buying 95% of America's aircraft exports and 90% of its munitions and explosives. Roosevelt also begins a domestic program of increased production with an eye toward war. He calls for an increase in production of aircraft to 50,000 a year. That number is so outlandish that Hitler's Minister of Propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, claims that Roosevelt is bluffing, and the Führer takes time from his busy schedule to pronounce FDR mentally ill. Across the full range of military hardware, factory output skyrockets. Production of fighter aircraft doubles in less than a year. The number of Garand rifles, the mainstay of the infantry, rises more than 300%. And production of tanks, which would be key in any attempt to stop Hitler's fast-moving armor columns, jumps an incredible 1,300% in a single year. This action by Roosevelt is not without political risk. 1940 is an election year, and Roosevelt is running for an unprecedented third term. Opinion polling, a young and inexact science, shows that even after the invasion of Poland, barely 7% of Americans believe it is wise for the United States to get involved in the war. Obvious to the president, however, is the tide of conflict currently rising all around the United States. There seems, in the president's view, little chance that the United States will be able to remain at peace while the rest of the world slips into war, and Congress has moved slowly into agreement with the president. By mid-1940, Congress approves the money necessary to build 200 warships, enough to put fleets in both the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Finally, on 16 September 1940, Congress approves the Burke-Wadsworth Bill, the first peacetime draft in American history. Whether the public is willing to pay that price for what is still seen as a foreign conflict remains to be seen. The eventual tenor of public opinion will, in large measure, be decided by the aggressors. Their actions alone will prove whether Roosevelt's build-up is necessary or an overreaction. Of the earth and the far corridors of history. Dateline, World War II. July 1940. For decades, a dispute has simmered between the United States and Japan in the Pacific. The Japanese see themselves as a superior race, divinely preordained to dominate East Asia. The United States, which holds as territories the islands of Hawaii and the Philippines, believes that Asia, under Japanese dominance, will be as closed to foreign trade as Japan historically has been. Now, in Japan, a new government forms. The cabinet is made up of militant nationalists interested primarily in conquest. Within weeks, the cabinet sets its foreign policy goals: victory in China, expansion of the Japanese empire southward, and a rolling back of American influence in the region. On 27 September, Japan signs what is called the Tripartite Pact with Nazi Germany and Italy. The pact requires no direct assistance to Hitler's aggression in Europe, but the Japanese hope that the threat of global war will intimidate the United States. What the pact does, in fact, is contribute to an anti-Japan backlash in the United States. President Roosevelt extends loans to China so that it might more effectively fight the Japanese invaders, and makes no secret of his willingness to fight to protect American interests in the Philippines. At the same time, in their quest for expansion, the Japanese attempt to extort strategic minerals from the Dutch East Indies. If the East Indies don't pay tribute of oil and aluminum-rich bauxite, Japan will invade the islands. There are those in the Japanese government who believe that an invasion of the East Indies might provoke an American response. The militarists in the cabinet order a large intelligence operation directed against the American Pacific Fleet, designed to track ship movements and capabilities. The diplomatic impasse between the United States and Japan continues, and in January 1941, the commander-in-chief of the Japanese Navy suggests that a preemptive strike on the U.S. fleet at Hawaii might be necessary. The thought of open warfare with the United States is chilling, and Emperor Hirohito, while not vetoing the suggestion, requests that efforts to resolve the nation's differences diplomatically be stepped up. In May 1941, Thailand signs a treaty promising not to ally with any other nation against Japan. By withdrawing as a potential bulwark against Japanese expansion, Thailand opens the door for Japanese occupation of the adjacent southern half of Indochina. Japan does not hesitate. Japanese military preparations for all-out war continue through summer and fall 1941. On 5 November, an imperial conference decides to make a final effort to reach a diplomatic peace with America, but the militarists insist that the negotiations not be drawn out indefinitely. If a settlement on Japanese terms is not reached by 1 December, the conference decides, Japan's military would begin their southern push. This decision to advance toward and presumably into American-held territory carries with it the strong implication that the Japanese will attack the United States closer to home, in Hawaii. On 20 November, the Japanese ambassador in Washington presents the final Japanese peace offer. If the United States ends the trade embargo with Japan, frees Japanese assets in the U.S., supplies the Japanese with oil, and allows the rising sun a free hand to conclude the war in China, the Japanese will withdraw from Indochina and allow free trade in the Dutch East Indies. Though the generals in Tokyo think the proposal reasonable, it is received in Washington with a decided lack of enthusiasm. Though the United States knows from decoded Japanese messages that a rejection of the offer will likely result in an early Japanese attack, the idea of actually assisting the Japanese adventurism in China is sufficiently repugnant that the offer is left to languish. The United States introduces a counter-proposal on 26 November demanding Japanese recognition of the Chinese government of Chiang Kai-shek. On 1st December, as the United States awaits a reply from the Japanese government, the Japanese embassy in Washington receives a chilling message. The diplomats are ordered to burn documents and destroy cryptographic equipment. The diplomats do as they are told, knowing full well what the orders imply about the future of American-Japanese diplomatic relations. December 1940, British units in Egypt launch an offensive against the Italian 10th Division. The ensuing battle is a rout. The undertrained, poorly led Italian troops are easily overrun, and within a matter of hours, 38,000 have been wounded, captured, or killed. English casualties number less than 700. The British continue to drive west in hot pursuit of the retreating Italians. By 22 January, they take the key deep-water port of Tobruk. The Italians retreat in such disorder, they leave behind a seawater distillation plant, essential to fielding an army in the harsh Libyan desert. Having occupied Tobruk, the English strike inland in a daring 200-mile cross-desert thrust to Beta Foam, successfully cutting off the reeling Italian 10th. For England, it is a much-needed victory. After the crushing blow they sustained in northern France and the daily doses of devastation delivered to their cities by the Luftwaffe, they have now given the invincible Axis a taste of its own medicine. In Berlin, Hitler is quickly becoming disgusted with his Italian counterpart, Benito Mussolini. Mussolini had assured him that Italian troops could defeat the British in Egypt without help from the Wehrmacht. Now, far from being beaten, the British are driving into central Libya, threatening German plans for the invasion of Greece. The Fuhrer tells Hermann Goering to ready his Luftwaffe for duty in North Africa and enlists the services of the young Major General who had proven so effective in northern France, Erwin Rommel. Given command of the newly created Africa Corps, Rommel arrives in Tripoli on 12 February and immediately begins preparations to turn the tide back in favor of the Axis. Both the German and British high commands expect Rommel to maintain a defensive position, a mere check on the British drive to the west. Rommel has other ideas. Instead of viewing the harsh Libyan desert as a hindrance to combat operations, he believes the vast open space offers tremendous opportunity to those bold enough to take advantage of it. On 24 March, the British, who believe it will be mid-May before Rommel is in a position to strike, are caught off guard by a heavy raid near El Alghilah. Rommel, sensing that this is his moment, disobeys Hitler's orders to remain on the defensive and launches an all-out attack. Rommel's strategy proves to be devastatingly effective. The vastness of the desert allows his panzer units to utilize their mobility to an unprecedented degree. Supported by the Luftwaffe, the Afrika Korps drives the British back in disarray. Having surrounded Tobruk, Rommel continues driving west until mid-April, when overextended supply lines force him to halt his drive near the Egyptian border. In 1 month, the Desert Fox, as his opponents have begun calling him, has retaken what it took the English army 4 months to gain. In mid-May, the British mount a counteroffensive designed to relieve the defenders of Tobruk, who are still surrounded by the Germans. Positioning his defenses in Halfaya Pass, Rommel uses 88mm anti-aircraft guns to destroy the advancing British armor before the tanks are close enough to return fire. Once again, the English taste defeat. Tobruk causes no end of grief for Rommel as well. Both he and the British realize the port is crucial to a continued German drive into Egypt. Throughout the summer, Rommel attempts to crack the city's defensive ring, but with no success. Although the desert is ideal for Rommel's armored warfare tactics, its hot, barren landscape makes supporting his army a nightmare. Ammunition, food, water, all are in short supply. His choice is simple: take Tobruk or withdraw. On 18 November, the British, who have been resupplied and reinforced, launch another offensive to relieve the besieged port city. The fighting is savage, the conditions brutal, yet despite suffering heavy losses, English forces break through the German ring and reach the city on 27 November. Rommel, realizing he cannot continue to fight without access to the sea, decides to withdraw. Although the British have secured Tobruk, they realize Rommel is far from beaten. The Desert Fox has proven himself a sly and dangerous enemy, and it is obvious his withdrawal is no chaotic retreat. It is, rather, a tactical maneuver. He is merely biding his time, waiting for the right moment to renew his assault and finish the job of driving the Allies from North Africa. June 1941, the roar of artillery and the rumble of tanks mark the end of the unlikely pact between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. As he has before, Adolf Hitler unleashes his blitzkrieg on a nation with which he is supposedly at peace. Known as Operation Barbarossa, the German offensive into Russia is the largest in history. 3 million men pour through massive holes punched by panzer divisions in the Russian defenses. The German offensive is divided into 3 wings. The main thrust of the attack is given to Field Marshal von Bach's Army Group Center. They are to drive east in a giant pincers movement towards Smolensk, entrapping and crushing large elements of the Red Army. With this done, they are to push on to Moscow and raise the Nazi banner high above the walls of the Kremlin. As in Poland and France, the German blitzkrieg routs the Russian defenders, driving them back in utter confusion. On 29 June, Guderian's and General Hot's forces meet up near Minsk, encircling more than 40 Russian divisions and taking over 300,000 prisoners. In the south, Lvov is overrun, and the 1st Panzer Group is already making advances on Kiev. On 3 July, Stalin broadcasts a message to the entire nation. He says the current conflict is a people's war, not just one for the Red Army. He calls for a scorched earth policy, leaving nothing for the advancing Germans. By 5 August, the Army Group Center has encircled over 700,000 Soviet troops at Smolensk. On 12 August, Hitler issues Directive 34, ordering army groups north and south to continue their drives to Leningrad and the Crimea. But he also orders, against the advice of his generals, that Army Group Center halt and assist the other forces. The German generals want to continue the drive for Moscow, virtually ensuring its fall before the Russian winter sets in. Russian roads, bad enough in favorable weather, become impassable in snow. The generals realize that the key to their success is mobility. Without it, they fear, the offensive will bog down and they will find themselves fighting in an environment for which they are totally unprepared. On 30 August, Army Group North cuts the last railroad link between Leningrad and the rest of the Soviet Union. The next day, they are within artillery range of the city itself. In the south, Guderian, who is driven south after the encirclement at Smolensk, joins in the assault on Kiev. On 12 September, his forces link up with General Kleist's, entrapping over 600,000 Soviet troops 100 miles west of the city. For all the good news, the German General Staff is most preoccupied with weather. The first snow falls on the Eastern Front. On 19 September, after losing 500,000 men in its defense, the Russians are forced to cede Kiev to Army Group South. For the Germans, the victory is bittersweet at best. The fierce Russian defense of the city has reduced the Nazi forces by over 100,000. One German general notes that, unlike the Poles and the French, the Russians are fighting to the last man. On 30 September, Guderian's 2nd Panzer Army, which has moved back north, begins the drive east from Moscow. He is joined on 2 October by the 3rd and 4th Panzer Groups and the 2nd, 4th, and 9th Armies. Though the advance on Moscow continues, the closer the Germans get to the city, the tougher the fighting becomes. Accustomed to winning staggering victories at little cost, they are now bogged down and taking heavy casualties. By mid-November, with hard winter descending around them, German morale is at an all-time low. Their soldiers do not have proper clothing to protect them from the cold, and their equipment is becoming less and less reliable. Winter may well be Russia's best ally. The Red Army, reeling from the speed of the German advance, now has time to regroup. They permit the Germans to advance slowly on Moscow while building their reserve forces on the outer flanks. On 2 December, forward German units advance to within sight of the Kremlin. Their divisions are at half strength. Their men are demoralized and frostbitten, and their equipment is failing miserably in the harsh Russian winter. Their long drive stalls. On 6 December, the Russian hammer drops. Along a 500-mile front around Moscow, the Soviets launch a massive counteroffensive. Devised by Marshal Georgy Zhukov, the Russian plan is to cut through the panzer groups on the wings of Army Group Center, then isolate and destroy it. The overextended, weakened German forces crumble under the onslaught of the fresh Russian troops. Hitler, for the first time, sees his mighty Wehrmacht stagger. Facing a rejuvenated Red Army, the German High Command looks forward with trepidation to the long Russian winter. June 1940, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, following massive loss of war material at Dunkirk, turns to the United States for assistance. The American War Department sells Britain over $43 million worth of supplies: guns, planes, ammunition, trucks, all the tools of war. Under the cash and carry policy in place since 9 November 1939, the British must pay for the goods before using them in their battle against Germany. Within a few months, however, the war effort depletes the British exchequer to such a degree that they no longer have the cash to replace the precious materials being so rapidly consumed in the war. Britain's resistance to the Nazi plague sweeping across Europe is in danger of faltering for lack of sustenance. In his fireside chat on 17 December, President Franklin Roosevelt states his intention in the strongest terms yet to assist Britain's war effort. He changes the cash and carry policy to lend-lease, providing weapons and munitions without demanding immediate payment. Roosevelt argues that were his neighbor's house on fire, he would immediately loan his garden hose without demanding payment beforehand. It is not simply a matter of watching out for one's neighbor, but of preventing the spread of fire to one's own house. Nearly 3 months of heated debate in Congress follows, and on 12 March, Roosevelt's lend-lease proposal becomes a reality. The president now has the power to manufacture, sell, lend, transfer, lease, or exchange any war material to the government of any country whose defense the president deems vital for the defense of the United States. On 27 March, Congress authorizes the first appropriation for lend-lease, providing Britain instant access to $7 billion in American goods. The British are ecstatic. Churchill proclaims lend-lease an inspiring act of faith, a monument of generous and far-reaching statesmanship, as well as the most unsordid act in history. In the United States, lend-lease provides 2 mammoth challenges. The first is the task of moving hundreds of thousands of tons of material across the ocean. The second, and more serious challenge, is in producing it. Even with factories running around the clock, not enough tanks, planes, and guns can be forged to fully meet Roosevelt's demands for both increases in American strength and exports. As industry gears up, many are left wondering, if war comes to America, will America have the ability to fight?